Have you ever looked out at a forest or a pond or even just your own backyard and realized you are actually watching the ultimate high-stakes game of survival? Literally every single living thing around you is constantly playing to win. They're using these deeply ingrained strategies to outlast and outmultiply the competition. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to break down the absolutely fascinating biology of organisms and populations and decode the secret rulebook of nature using the incredible science of ecology.
Okay, let's kick things off with a question that sounds simple, but really isn't. Why are night-blooming flowers generally white? Now, in biology, we spend a lot of time asking how questions. Like, how exactly does a bird's voice box actually produce a song? But ecology thrives on why questions. Why does a cactus have thorns? Why are those night-blooming flowers white? Well, the answer is evolution and survival. They're white to absolutely maximize their visibility to nocturnal pollinators under the moonlight. It's these why questions that reveal the brilliant, hidden strategies of life. But to really understand these strategies, we kind of need to set up our playing field first. Ecology is basically the study of the interactions among organisms and between those organisms and their physical environment. So think of the physical environment, the soil, the water, the climate, as the official game board. The organisms are the players, constantly interacting with that board and with each other just to stay alive. So here's our game plan for today's explainer. 1. The study of connections. 2. Anatomy of a population. 3. The math of growth. And 4. Friends, foes, and freeloaders. All right, diving into section 1, the study of connections, from the micro to the macro. To really grasp ecology, we have to zoom out. It essentially operates across 4 levels of biological organization. You start with individual organisms. Then, when organisms of the exact same species group together, they form populations. Multiple populations interacting make up communities. And on a massive global scale, we have biomes. But for today, we are going to enthusiastically zero in on level 2, populations. Because in this grand game of survival, populations are the main players. It is at the population level that natural selection truly operates to evolve those winning traits. Moving right along to section 2. Anatomy of a population, or what we can call the player stats. Just like characters in a video game have specific stats that single parts don't possess, populations have attributes that an individual organism just doesn't have. An individual is born and dies, right? But a population has birth rates and death rates. Take a look at this age pyramid. It plots the percentage of individuals in pre-reproductive, reproductive, and post-reproductive age groups. By just glancing at the base of these pyramids, the pre-reproductive ratio, you can instantly tell if a population is winning or losing. A wide base, that means the population is expanding. A balanced base means it's stable. And a narrow base, unfortunately, that population is declining. It's literally a real-time snapshot of survival. Now, the ultimate indicator of a population's success is its size, which we technically call population density. But here's the catch. It's not always just a simple head count. Imagine you have 200 tiny carrot grass plants, but only one massive, sprawling banyan tree. Counting numbers completely underestimates the banyan's massive role in that area. So in that case, we measure biomass, or percent cover, instead. And sometimes the players are just too elusive. In our national parks, we actually measure tiger population density indirectly, using clues like pug marks, which are their footprints, and fecal pellets.
Let's jump to section 3, the math of growth, or scoring points. Because survival isn't just about existing, is it? It's about multiplying. And nature follows strict mathematical rules to dictate how populations expand. The absolute crucial point here is this parameter called R, the intrinsic rate of natural increase. Think of R as a species' inherent speed limit for growth. It calculates births minus deaths. Just to make this math tangible, the R value for the Norway rat is exactly 0.015. For the flower beetle, it's 0.12. This one little number evaluates exactly how fast a species can multiply if literally nothing stands in its way. And speaking of that, what actually happens when nothing stands in their way? There's this fantastic old anecdote about a king who lost a chess bet to his minister. The minister asked to be paid in wheat. 1 grain on the first square, 2 on the second, 4 on the third, just doubling it for all 64 squares. The king agreed, thinking, oh, that's a tiny amount.
But by halfway across the board, the king realized all the wheat in his entire kingdom couldn't fill the squares. That is the terrifying, unstoppable power of unchecked exponential multiplication. Let's put that into biological terms. Imagine a single microscopic paramecium. It reproduces by splitting in half, so it's doubling in numbers every single day. If it were given unlimited food and space, just imagine the staggering, mind-boggling population size it would reach after 64 days of doubling. It's enough to practically cover the Earth. No way, right?
Well, the reality check is that no habitat has unlimited food and space. That fantasy is exponential growth, the J-shaped curve. Real life is logistic growth, the S-shaped curve. Eventually, resources start running out, competition kicks in hard, and the growth slows down and levels off. That leveling off point has a very specific name, and it's a critical rule of the game: carrying capacity. We represent it with the letter K. This is the absolute limit of the game board. It's the maximum number of players that a specific habitat can sustainably support. Once a population hits carrying capacity, the easy growth is completely over, and the real fight for survival begins. Which brings us perfectly to our final section: friends, foes, and freeloaders, the multiplayer strategies. When space and food run low and populations hit that carrying capacity, different species are forced into intense interactions, because in nature, isolation is basically impossible. Think of this interaction matrix as nature's official scorecard. It tracks exactly who wins, who loses, and who simply doesn't care. A plus sign, that species benefits. A minus, they are harmed. A 0 means they are completely unaffected. In mutualism, both win. In competition, surprisingly, both actually lose because they drain each other's energy. In predation and parasitism, one wins and one loses. And commensalism, one wins while the other is totally indifferent. Let's see how this actually plays out in the wild. Let's kick off with predation. Now, for plants, herbivores are the predators. And because a plant obviously can't just up and run away, they've evolved an astonishing array of armor and chemical warfare. Acacia and cactus use physical thorns. The calotropis weed goes a step further and produces highly poisonous cardiac glycosides that can literally stop an animal's heart. And fun fact, many chemicals we use daily, like nicotine, caffeine, and quinine, were actually evolved by plants specifically as toxic defenses against grazing insects and animals. Next up is competition, and things get pretty ruthless here with Gauss's competitive exclusion principle. This is one of the most brutal rules on the board. It states that if two closely related species are competing for the exact same limited resources, they absolutely cannot coexist forever. Eventually, the competitively weaker player gets completely eliminated from the board. Boom, gone. It is a harsh, zero-sum game. Then we have parasitism. This is where a parasite gets free lodging and meals at the expense of the host. But here's an evolutionary paradox for you to chew on. Wouldn't an ideal parasite thrive without harming its host, so the host lives longer? Why didn't natural selection just lead to totally harmless parasites? Well, it's because of a relentless coevolutionary arms race. Hosts constantly evolve mechanisms to reject parasites, which forces the parasites to evolve even more aggressive ways to stay attached and drain those resources. And it gets crazier. Some parasites don't even feed on the host's body. They literally steal their labor. This is called brood parasitism, and it is a wonderfully devious cheating strategy. The cuckoo bird, for example, doesn't even bother building a nest. It just hijacks a crow's nest, laying its eggs right there among the crow's eggs. Over evolutionary time, the cuckoo's eggs have even evolved to resemble the crow's eggs in size and color. It totally tricks the host into incubating and feeding the intruder's babies. Now, compare that destructive relationship to commensalism. This is where one player benefits and the other simply doesn't care. A classic example is the cattle egret and grazing cattle. As the cattle are just moving through the grass, they stir up and flush out all these hidden insects. The egrets just follow close behind, scoring an incredibly easy meal. The egret massively benefits, but the grazing cattle, they are entirely 100% unaffected by the birds. But honestly, the most spectacular relationships happen in mutualism, where both species benefit. Often this requires intense co-evolution, where the biology of two species becomes tightly, permanently linked. And let me tell you, no one runs a more elaborate, unbelievable play than the Mediterranean orchid.
So the Mediterranean orchid, called Ophrys, it doesn't bother offering sweet nectar to attract pollinators. Instead, it employs mind-blowing sexual deceit. I'm entirely serious. One petal of the orchid flower has evolved to look perfectly like the female of a very specific bee species. The male bee is attracted to it and actually attempts to mate with the flower, a process biologists call pseudocopulation. During this whole fake-out, he gets dusted with pollen. When he flies off and is eventually fooled by another orchid, he transfers the pollen. The orchid gets its pollination totally guaranteed, entirely by mimicking its partner's mate. It's genius.
So, from exponential math on a literal chessboard, to plants using chemical warfare in their leaves, to the elaborate sexual deceit of a tiny orchid, ecology shows us that nature is just a complex, relentless arena. Every organism, every population is playing the exact hand it was dealt by evolution to survive under that hard limit of carrying capacity. So I'll leave you with this to ponder. In this high-stakes game of survival, which evolutionary strategy would you choose to outplay the competition? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep observing the absolutely incredible strategies playing out in the world around you.